Israel was going to strike Iran, and of course, we knew nothing about that. But we knew that if Israel struck Iran, that Iran would strike us, so we had to strike Iran first. Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of Senator Kane's War Powers resolution to halt Donald Trump's unjustified, illegal, regime change war against Iran. We have a lawless president who is shredding our Constitution and attacking our democracy right here at home. And that same lawlessness and recklessness has pervaded our foreign and national security policy, now putting American troops in harm's way in Donald Trump's war of choice. Let's not forget, colleagues, what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance promised the American people. Think back to all the times that they looked the American people in the eye and said they would not drag America into another war, especially another war in the Middle East. They said it over and over. They called themselves the pro-peace ticket. Vice President Vance wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed in 2023 making the case for Trump's 2024 presidential candidacy. The headline of his op-ed, and I quote, "Trump's best foreign policy, ? Not starting any wars." That's what J.D. Vance promised would come from a Trump-Vance White House. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, sold, quote, "no war with Iran" shirts in 2020. 4 years later, she declared, and I quote, "a vote for Donald Trump is a vote to end wars, not start them," end quote. That's our current Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Donald Trump even calls himself now the peacemaker. And on election night in 2024, he said, and I quote, "I'm not going to start wars, I'm going to stop wars." That was Donald Trump at the end of his campaign, repeating what he had said throughout his presidential campaign. Well, they broke their promises. They lied directly to the American people. President Trump has already ordered more military strikes against more countries than any president in the modern era, including against countries that have never been targeted by the U.S. military. And now Trump has launched an all-out, illegal, regime change war of choice against Iran. And let's be clear, this is not a war to make us safer. What the president has done is to make the world less safe for Americans. And he's chosen to put American servicemen and women at risk for a war that he said he would never start, that he promised he would never start. As of today, we have lost 6 brave American service members to this war. I pray for them and their families. They should still be with us today. In response to their deaths, President Trump said just yesterday that, quote, "sadly, there will likely be more. That's the way it is." That's how Donald Trump responds to American troops killed in this war of choice that he started. He said, "That's just the way it is." Really, colleagues? We should not send our sons and daughters to fight and die. We should not spend billions of dollars of taxpayer money for a war that is not in our interests and has no end in sight. No one in the Trump administration, including the president, has made a credible argument for why it's in America's interests to start a war against Iran. They haven't because it isn't. Donald Trump and his administration have spent the last 48 hours telling different reporters and news agencies a whole host of different objectives and a whole set of different timelines. One claim that has been thoroughly debunked was that Iran was going to strike America first. That is a lie. It's a proven lie. So now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is spinning another version of this. He said we had to strike Iran first because Israel launched an attack on Iran. And here's his twisted logic. Israel was going to strike Iran, and of course, we knew nothing about that. But we knew that if Israel struck Iran, that Iran would strike us, so we had to strike Iran first. Mr. President, the deception is deep and it's sickening. This administration lied to the American people during the campaign before they were in office, and they're lying now. Another objective that has been cited was to end Iran's nuclear weapons capability. But we know that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons capability. That's also a lie. And of course, we know that President Trump told the country that American and Israeli strikes last year had completely obliterated the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Remember that? And of course, this is the president who in his first term ripped up the agreement between the United States and Iran to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. We also know from the Omani intermediaries, including the foreign minister of Oman, that Iran was willing to put much tighter restraints on any future possible nuclear enrichment programs. But apparently the Trump administration had already decided to go to war. Another reason we've heard from members of the administration, they're constantly shifting rationales, has been Iran's ballistic missile program. But Iran has 0 missiles that can reach the United States, not even close, none. So in yet another interview, Donald Trump said the aim is, quote, freedom for the Iranian people, unquote. In other words, regime change. Regime change. The regime change he promised he would never undertake if he became president. Now, colleagues, we all know, every one of us, that the Iranian government is a terrible regime, brutal to its own people, dangerous to the region. But we've also learned from history that bombs don't turn dictatorships into democracies. And already, the Israeli and American strikes on Iran have produced mass civilian casualties. We've already seen reports of hospitals being bombed. In one strike alone, at least 175 civilians were killed at an elementary school, most of them schoolgirls, which has the hallmarks of a war crime. These killings should not be a surprise, especially when Secretary Hegseth said this morning that the operation would have, quote, no stupid rules of engagement. That's what the Secretary of Defense said. Anything goes. This is not a way to bring solidarity and support from the Iranian people. When we and the Israelis take out a country's leadership, we have no idea what will emerge next. In fact, back in 1953, the United States and the United Kingdom backed a coup against a democratically elected leader in Iran that enabled the Shah of Iran to consolidate power in the country. Some people thought that served American interests at the time. Instead, it became one of the primary drivers of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and the creation of the Islamic Republic and its ideology. So beware what you ask for. Indeed, according to public reports, the CIA assessed that the most likely scenario if the supreme leader was killed was that more radical elements of the IRGC would take power in Iran. This does not advance America's interests in the region or the world. It will not make us safer. It will make the world less safe for America. And is it now the policy of the United States to go to war against every regime we hate? Colleagues, that's going to cost a lot of American lives and treasure. And that's presumably why Trump and Vance had previously been opposed to regime change and wars of choice. So beware what we ask for when we open up Pandora's box. Have we not learned the lessons of Iraq? The Iraq War cost the lives of 8,000 American soldiers and contractors. It cost trillions of dollars in taxpayer money. The war upended the region, killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians, and helped spawn ISIS. It was the worst U.S. foreign policy blunder in a generation. And the big winner from the war in Iraq? Iran. Iran was the big winner. So now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says this war against Iran is something he has, quote, yearned to do for 40 years, unquote. Well, he got the war he wanted from Donald Trump. But there is a reason past presidents have not started wars against Iran, and that's because they refused to risk American lives and open Pandora's box for a regime change war when they had no idea how it would end. And this war is rapidly turning into a conflict that we feared, a widespread escalatory regional war with no end in sight. Iran has retaliated to U.S. and Israeli attacks by attacking U.S. assets and bases in every Arab country in the Persian Gulf, as well as targets in Israel, resulting in further loss of lives. This includes drones and missile strikes on civilian infrastructure throughout the region. And just last night, Hezbollah joined the fray, launching missiles into Israel, prompting airstrikes from Israel into Beirut and across Lebanon. This is not America first. And we have no idea where it's going. What we do know is that the framers of our Constitution never envisioned this to be allowed under our system of government. It's why the framers in our Constitution gave Congress the power to declare war. They didn't want to give that power to one person. They didn't want to give that power to somebody like Donald Trump, who has said publicly that the only thing constraining his power is, quote, my own morality, my own mind, unquote. That's what Donald Trump has said. So, colleagues in the Senate, you must understand that is not what the Constitution requires. The Constitution requires Congress to act to declare war. So it's more important than ever that Congress stand up for the Constitution, that Congress insist that the president cannot continue these hostilities without approval from Congress, shouldn't have started them without approval of Congress. And so the resolution before us asks a simple question. Do you support the Constitution of the United States and the role it gives to the United States Congress, that role to declare war? Do you believe that we, the people's elected representatives in the House and Senate, should have a voice in whether American lives, and specifically the lives of the members of our nation's armed forces, are put at grave risk? And do you believe that this regime change war of choice that Donald Trump promised he would never launch serves American interests or makes our nation safer? Mr. President, the American people do not want this war. And the Congress entrusts, the Constitution entrusts the power to declare war with the United States Congress. Let's not surrender that responsibility. And I urge my colleagues to support the War Powers Resolution and vote yes. And I yield the floor.
Moments ago, on the Senate floor, Senator Chris Van Hollen rose and delivered a warning that echoed far beyond the chamber's marble walls. He stood in support of the War Powers Resolution and declared that the United States has been pulled into what he called an unjustified and illegal war of choice against Iran. His words were not casual, they were sharp, direct, accusatory. He reminded the nation that promises were made, clear promises, not to drag America into another Middle East conflict, and he said those promises have now been broken. He invoked the campaign trail, the speeches, the headlines, the assurances that there would be no new wars. He quoted Vice President J.D. Vance's own words, not starting any wars. He pointed to statements from intelligence leadership promising that a vote for this administration was a vote to end wars, not begin them. He recalled the president's own declaration on election night. I'm not going to start wars, I'm going to stop wars. And then he contrasted those words with reality. Military strikes, escalation, American service members lost, a widening regional conflict. And as Van Hollen emphasized, no clear end in sight. This is not merely a policy disagreement, it is a constitutional confrontation. At the heart of Van Hollen's speech was not only opposition to the war itself, but a deeper alarm, the erosion of Congress's authority to declare war. The framers of the Constitution did not give that power to one individual. They debated it. They feared concentrated power. They understood that the decision to send Americans into battle must never rest solely on the will of a single executive. It was meant to require deliberation, consensus, accountability. Van Hollen's charge is that this line has been crossed. He argued that the administration offered shifting justifications, claims about imminent threats, about regional alliances, about strategic necessity, yet none that, in his view, withstand scrutiny. He challenged the logic presented by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He questioned the narrative that the strikes were unavoidable. He insisted that the American people were told one thing during the campaign and are witnessing another now. This moment reveals something profound about modern governance. It reveals how fragile the balance of powers can become when urgency overtakes process, when speed replaces debate, when executive authority expands into spaces the Constitution reserved for Congress. But it also reveals something else: the enduring tension between national security and constitutional order, between decisive action and democratic restraint. War reshapes nations. It alters budgets, priorities, alliances, and lives. It demands sacrifice. It changes history. And when it begins without unified consent, it fractures trust. Van Hollen's argument is not only about Iran, it is about Iraq, about Afghanistan, about the lessons etched into the American consciousness over decades of conflict. He asked whether the country has learned anything from wars that spiraled far beyond their original objectives. He invoked history, the 1953 coup in Iran, the unintended consequences that followed, the rise of forces few had anticipated. His warning was clear: regime change is not a slogan. It is a gamble. And history shows that its outcomes are rarely predictable. As tensions rise across the region, retaliatory strikes, expanding alliances, new actors entering the conflict, the fear of escalation becomes more than theoretical. It becomes immediate, real, tangible. Van Hollen framed the debate in stark moral terms. He spoke of American lives already lost. He spoke of families who expected peace and now face mourning. He quoted the president's response to casualties, "That's the way it is," and suggested that such acceptance cannot be the standard by which a democracy measures sacrifice. His central question cut through the rhetoric: is it now the policy of the United States to go to war against every regime it opposes? And if so, at what cost? This is where the moment transcends partisanship. Because beneath the political clash lies a deeper issue: the meaning of accountability. Who decides when Americans fight? Who weighs the risks? Who answers when the consequences unfold? The War Powers resolution before the Senate is not simply a procedural vote. It is a test of whether Congress will assert its constitutional role. A test of whether lawmakers will reclaim authority that the framers deliberately placed in their hands. Van Hollen framed it plainly: do you support the Constitution? Do you believe Congress should have a voice before American lives are placed at risk? Those are not rhetorical flourishes. They are foundational questions about the American system itself, and that is why this moment matters. Because in times of crisis, the pressure to centralize power grows stronger. The argument for speed over debate becomes louder. But the Constitution was written precisely for such moments. It was designed not for calm seasons, but for turbulent ones. This war, Van Hollen argues, is not America first. It is not clearly defined. It is not bounded by a timeline or objective. And without congressional authorization, it stands on uncertain constitutional ground. Whether one agrees with his conclusions or not, the gravity of the debate is undeniable. The stakes are immense: American credibility, regional stability, the lives of those in uniform, the integrity of constitutional checks and balances. History will judge how this chapter unfolds. It will ask whether leaders upheld their oaths, whether institutions functioned as designed, whether warnings were heeded or ignored. And tonight, as the Senate considers the War Powers resolution, the question remains suspended in the air of that chamber. Who decides when America goes to war? America goes, The answer to that question will define not just this conflict, but the future of executive power itself. If you believe that constitutional accountability matters, if you believe that the American people deserve transparency when lives are at stake, then stay informed, stay engaged, and subscribe to Liberty Report USA, where we continue to examine power, policy, and the truth behind the headlines.